Good morning, everyone. I hope we're still on track. Vanbrugh was appointed Clarenceux King of Arms on the 3rd of April 1704. As the Earl Marshal, the Duke of Norfolk, was a minor, his duties were carried out by his cousin, the 3rd Earl of Carlisle, Deputy Earl Marshal, who saw Vanbrugh's appointment as a good opportunity to reward his protégé. The appointment caused much consternation and resentment among the existing heralds, what Vanbrugh called a great deal of saucy opposition. Machinations also carried on behind the scenes, with John Anstice plotting with the mother of the Duke of Norfolk to get himself made Clarenceux, with a promise that he would eventually become Garter King of Arms. Trying to thwart Carlisle's plan to appoint Vanbrugh, he said snidely, "His name speaks of his Dutch extraction." The heralds, who felt that only an existing herald should be made a King of Arms, petitioned Queen Anne, but following a hearing before the Queen and Privy Council, she declared in favour of Vanbrugh. Vanbrugh's portrait hangs in the Earl Marshal's court at the College of Arms. It is attributed to Jonathan Richardson. He is holding an architectural drawing inscribed Blenheim, and round his neck he wears his badge of office as Clarenceux King of Arms. Interestingly, he wears the same badge in his Kit Kat portrait by Sir Godfrey Kneller, and again in his portrait by Thomas Murray, so he was clearly proud of his position and not quite as dismissive of it as has been suggested. The College of Arms dates back to 1484, when King Richard III granted the heralds a charter of incorporation with a house in the City of London. However, the present site was given to the heralds in 1555, when they were granted their second royal charter by King Philip and Queen Mary, and given the former Derby Place. The building that we see today, and Vanbrugh would have known, rose from the ashes in the wake of the Great Fire of London. The heralds come under the authority of the Earl Marshal, a hereditary office held by the Dukes of Norfolk. When the Earl Marshal's Catholic faith or age prevented him from carrying out his duties, a deputy was appointed, usually a member of the extended Howard family. Hence, the 3rd Earl of Carlisle as Deputy Earl Marshal, nominating Vanbrugh to the Queen. All heralds are appointed by the monarch. You can see a later Deputy Earl Marshal, another Howard, the Earl of Effingham, in this Ackerman engraving, seated on the throne in the Earl Marshal's court, judging a case of chivalry. The College of Arms hierarchy comprises 3 Kings of Arms: Garter, Clarenceux, whose province is south of the River Trent, and Norroy and Ulster, whose province is north of the Trent, and since 1943, Northern Ireland. 6 heralds and 4 pursuivants, or junior heralds. They are collectively known as Officers of Arms. Garter is the most senior herald, with Clarenceux in second position. The heralds were responsible for great ceremonies of state, such as coronations, the state opening of Parliament, and state funerals. However, their day-to-day work concerned, and still does, proving rights to existing coats of arms and applications for new ones, family history research, and answering general inquiries. At the end of the 17th century, the heralds were reliant on minute salaries and their shares upon partition of fees. As Clarenceux King of Arms, Vanbrugh would have received a larger share of the fees. So to have made fun of heralds with his comic character Quaint in his 1696 play Aesop must have been particularly galling to his new colleagues, as he helped himself to a lion's share of the fees. This is the partition book for August 1715, showing his share of the fees he received following the creation of the Prince of Wales, the future George II, and the first Duke of Ancaster, more of whom later. A record of every grant of arms has been kept at the College of Arms since 1673. This is a record of the grant of arms to Vanbrugh himself in 1714, confirming his ancestral foreign arms, which are known as canting arms, with a visual pun on brugh, Dutch for bridge. The crest has an inverted bridge. The grant gives details of the Vanbrugh family, who, we are told, fled to England from Flanders to escape the religious persecution. At the same date, Vanbrugh placed a pedigree on record for the Vanbrugh family, traced back to his great-grandfather. 2 years after Vanbrugh was appointed Clarenceux King of Arms, he and Lord Halifax led a delegation to Hanover to confer the Order of the Garter on Prince George, the future George II. Visits like this were rare and day-to-day work was more mundane. Perhaps surprisingly, Vanbrugh was a regular attendant at the monthly and sometimes more frequent chapter meetings held by the heralds. Only when he was out of town did he miss the meetings, showing that he took the role of Clarenceux more seriously than he has been sometimes given credit for. This is what is known as a library painting, a certified painting of someone's coat of arms on vellum, signed by a herald. It shows the arms of John Mellor and is signed by Vanbrugh in 1707, although a later hand, when inking in his faded signature, has mistakenly renamed him Bambrugh. It still hangs at Mellor's home Erddig near Wrexham in North Wales. During his time as Clarenceux King of Arms, Vanbrugh signed a total of 193 grants of arms. Among these was a grant to the landscape gardener Henry Wise in 1720 and a grant to the cabinet and mirror maker John Gumley in 1722. Can we see the influence of heraldry in Vanbrugh's architecture? At a period when heraldry takes a much less prominent role in domestic architecture, Vanbrugh cannot resist the sheer theatricality of it. This can be seen in the superbly sculpted arms in the pediment of the garden front of Castle Herauld. The Earl of Carlisle's arms are shown with 6 quarterings representing the families of Howard, Thomas of Brotherton, Warren, Mowbray, Dacre and Greystock. An Earl's coronet proudly sits on top, while the lion and bull supporters almost pull the shield down. The motto, Volo non valeo, I am willing but not able, is emblazoned beneath. With typical Baroque flourish, military trophies spill out either side. Likewise, the north front of Blenheim Palace is centred by a gigantic rendition of the first Duke of Marlborough's arms. The shield is divided into 4 quarters for Churchill, Wildlard, Till and Winston, and surrounded by the garter strap. It is supported by 2 wyverns, mythological creatures like a dragon but with 2 legs, below a duke's coronet. Behind is an imperial double-headed eagle, as the first Duke of Marlborough had been made a prince of the Holy Roman Empire. A coronet for a prince of the Holy Roman Empire tops the composition, while martial trophies fill the remaining space either side. Everything resting on the Churchill motto, Fiel pero desdicato, faithful though unfortunate. Duke's coronets also teeter on the tops of the finials topping the 4 corner pavilions. Inside, the royal arms of Queen Anne, post the 1707 Act of Union, decorate the keystone of the enormous arch in the Great Hall, flanked by 2 trumpeting putti, one cradling a palm branch, the other a branch of laurel. They stand on a rippling motto scroll with the words Semper Idem, always the same, the motto used first by Queen Elizabeth I to convince the world that she would hold an even course in her whole life and all her actions, in the words of a former Elizabethan Clarenceux King of Arms, William Camden. Camden was a noted antiquarian, so it was entirely appropriate that Vanbrugh should have had antiquarian leanings and battled to preserve Woodstock Manor. In 1715, Vanbrugh was nominated Garter King of Arms and carried out the office of Garter with the title Clarenceux Nominated Garter. But his arch nemesis, John Anstice, was eventually appointed Garter 4 years later, on the strength of his reversionary patent, which Queen Anne had signed shortly before her death in 1714, partly in punishment for Vanbrugh's fateful letter to the Mayor of Woodstock bemoaning the Duke of Marlborough's treatment. As Vanbrugh wrote to the Duke of Newcastle, "This Anstice is a sad thief, and has done just as I thought and said he would." One of his more interesting roles as a herald took place in 1716, when he went to Windsor with the other heralds to perform the ceremony of degradation of the second Duke of Ormond. After morning prayer, Vanbrugh read the sovereign's warrant. Windsor herald ascended a ladder over the Duke's stall, and first threw down the sword, then the banner rolled up, and last the helm and crest, which were severally kicked out of the choir by the heralds, beginning with Vanbrugh down to the most junior herald, right out of the great west door. Vanbrugh then pulled down the Duke's stall plate. The dramatic side of Vanbrugh must have enjoyed some of the ceremonial dressing up. This is an account from the Royal Wardrobe of 1717 for new tabards with the royal arms as they became after the accession of George I in 1714. The arms have a fourth quarter for Hanover. It is at Grimsthorpe in Lincolnshire that we really see heraldry coming into its own in Vanbrugh's architecture. Although Vanbrugh started work at Grimsthorpe for his kinsman, the first Duke of Ancaster, it was his son, the second Duke, who brought it all to fruition. It is the second Duke's coat of arms that crowns the parapet, forming a focal point for the north front, with its arcaded forecourt, flanking pavilions, and wrought iron grille, also with his arms, made by Edward Nutt in 1730. Ancaster's arms have a quartered shield for Barty, Wynne, Beak and Willoughby, with Brownlow in pretence for his heiress wife Jane. The shield is flanked by a friar and a savage, or wildman, the Willoughby de Eresby supporters. The Duke was also Lord Willoughby de Eresby. Above the shield is a Duke's coronet, peer's helm, and the Willoughby crest of a Saracen's head, ducally crowned. The plinth they stand on is carved with the motto, "Loyalty may oblige, loyalty binds me." The Barty arms, 3 battering rams, are repeated on the frieze above the twin columns, while the Willoughby arms, or fretty azure, is just above on the underside of the cornice. Inside, the monumental aptly named Vanbrugh Hall again references the Barty arms. They appear on carved tablets with an escutcheon flanked by overflowing cornucopia below a duke's coronet. On the inside of the front door, the Saracen's head crest is carved in high relief on the classical frieze. The crest also appears on the Mannerist chimney-piece on either side of a cartouche with the monogram of George I, surmounted by a duke's coronet. The furnishings also pick up the heraldic theme, with the Saracen's head crest carved on the boss of the gilt gesso chandeliers, made for the room by James Moore and John Gumley, who we met with earlier when we looked at his grant of arms. The hall chairs also bear the arms of the second Duke of Ancaster, and his crest on the front legs. They have a theatrical air based on Italian Renaissance scabbello chairs. Vanbrugh continued as Clarenceux King of Arms until he resigned on the 9th of February 1725, when he sold his position for £2,000 to Knox Ward. He was clearly an efficient time manager, as during his last decade as Clarenceux, he had not only continued his architectural designs, but had been reinstated as Comptroller of the King's Works and been made Surveyor of Gardens and Waters, as well as getting married and starting a family. When he was buried in the family vault in St. Stephen's, Walbrook, he was joining his grandfather, Giles Vanbrugh, who we are told in the text of Vanbrugh's grant of arms, sometime before his death in 1646, had purchased a vault for a repository for himself and family. His portrait at the College of Arms stands as a memorial to his time as a herald.